The autumn wind carried golden leaves across Main Street as Edith Paulson stepped out of her rental car in front of Marshfield Town Hall. It was October 15, 2007, and the small town was preparing for the Harvest Festival. Orange and yellow decorations adorned storefronts, and the scent of apple cider drifted from the cafe 2 doors down. Edith was 47 years old, though people often guessed younger due to her careful posture and clear eyes. She wore a conservative navy suit, professional but not intimidating, and carried a leather portfolio that contained her carefully prepared resume. The resume listed 18 years of government administrative work in various locations, all technically true, all deliberately vague. She had chosen Marshfield after weeks of research. It was small enough to offer anonymity, but large enough to need administrative staff. It was far from Washington, D.C., far from the intelligence community, far from anyone who might recognize her. Most importantly, it was the kind of place where people minded their own business while still being neighborly. The town hall was a handsome brick building erected in 1923, according to the cornerstone. Inside, the lobby featured black and white photographs of Marshfield's history, the founding in 1847, the railroad arrival in 1882, the Great Fire of 1901, and subsequent rebuilding. "Can I help you?" asked a cheerful woman at the reception desk. Her nameplate read Sarah Mitchell. "Yes, I have an appointment with Mr. Harrison about the archive clerk position. I'm Edith Paulson." "Oh, wonderful! He's expecting you. Just up those stairs, second door on the right." Martin Harrison, the town manager, was a jovial man in his early 60s with a generous mustache and kind eyes. His office was cluttered with files and coffee cups, giving an impression of organized chaos. "Miss Paulson, please, sit down. Can I get you coffee?" "No, thank you. I'm fine." They talked for 30 minutes. Harrison explained that the previous archive clerk had retired after 42 years of service, and they needed someone meticulous and patient to maintain the town's records. Edith asked intelligent questions about the filing system, digitization plans, and record retention policies. She demonstrated exactly the right level of competence, qualified, but not threateningly so. "Your resume is impressive," Harrison said, though Edith could see he hadn't examined it too closely. "All that government experience. May I ask why you're looking to work in a small town now?" Edith had prepared for this question. "I've spent my entire career in high-pressure administrative roles, Mr. Harrison. I'm at a point in my life where I'd like something quieter, more grounded. Marshfield seems like exactly the kind of community I'd be proud to serve." It was perfect. Honest enough to be believable, vague enough to discourage follow-up questions. "Well, we'd be lucky to have you. When can you start?" 3 days later, Edith began her new life as the archive clerk of Marshfield. The basement archive room was exactly what she needed. Quiet, organized, controllable. The previous clerk, Dorothy Harmon, had maintained an excellent system, and Edith spent her first week simply learning its logic. Tom Richardson, the town clerk, showed her around and introduced her to the other staff. Everyone was welcoming in the way that small-town people often are, genuinely friendly but also curious about the newcomer. "Where did you move from?" asked Margaret Chen, who ran the planning department. "Most recently Virginia," Edith replied, "but I've lived in several places over the years." "Any family?" "No, it's just me. I've never married." This was true and usually ended the personal questions quickly. During that first week, Edith also found her cottage, a small, well-maintained rental on Maple Street. The landlord, an elderly man named Gerald Porter, asked few questions and seemed pleased to have a quiet, responsible tenant. Most of my rentals go to young families, he explained as he showed her the house. Gets noisy sometimes, but that's life, isn't it? You'll find Marshfield is a good place for peace and quiet. Peace and quiet. That was exactly what Edith needed. The cottage had 2 bedrooms, a modest kitchen, a small living room with a fireplace, and a backyard with mature trees. Edith furnished it simply, comfortable but impersonal, like a carefully constructed stage set for the role she was playing. Each night, she would sit in the living room, listening to the sounds of her new neighborhood. Children playing, dogs barking, couples arguing, and making up. Normal life. The kind of life she had protected from afar for 18 years, but had never actually lived. The first year in Marshfield passed in a gentle blur of routine and gradual integration. Edith discovered that becoming part of a small-town community required patience and consistency. She couldn't force belonging. It had to grow naturally. She joined the public library's volunteer program, spending Saturday mornings reshelving books and helping patrons. The head librarian, Patricia Vance, was a sharp-eyed woman in her 70s who ran the library with benevolent efficiency. "You're very organized," Patricia observed after Edith had reorganized an entire section of local history books. "Most volunteers just stuff books wherever they fit." "I like systems," Edith replied. "They make sense to me." "Well, you're a treasure. Come back any time." Edith also began attending services at the Methodist Church, not out of deep religious conviction, but because it was an important social institution in Marshfield. Reverend William Thompson gave thoughtful sermons and hosted community dinners once a month. Edith volunteered to help with setup and cleanup, making herself useful without drawing attention. She developed a reputation for excellent baking. Her apple pies became requested items at church potlucks and town events. The recipe was actually her grandmother's, one of the few genuine personal details she allowed herself to share. "Edith, this pie is heavenly," gushed Carol Henderson, who ran the town's only bakery. "You should sell these." "Oh, I couldn't compete with your wonderful shop," Edith demurred. "I just enjoy baking for friends." Friends. It was strange to use that word again. In her previous life, she'd had colleagues, contacts, assets, but few genuine friends. The nature of intelligence work discouraged deep personal connections. You never knew when someone might be an operational risk. But in Marshfield, friendship meant something different. It meant Margaret Chen bringing over casserole when she made too much. It meant Sheriff Daniels waving from his patrol car. It meant Tom Richardson saving articles from the county newspaper that he thought she might enjoy. These small gestures of kindness both touched and troubled her. These people liked her, but they didn't really know her. Was it friendship if it was based on carefully managed information? Edith pushed such thoughts aside. She had made her choice. The person she had been, the analyst who had caused 18 deaths through faulty intelligence, couldn't exist anymore. This new person, Edith the archive clerk, was her attempt at redemption through obscurity. Her work at the town hall became a source of genuine satisfaction. The archive was a puzzle she could solve, a system she could perfect. She implemented small improvements, better labeling, more logical filing categories, a simple database to track document locations. "I don't know how we managed before you came," Tom told her after she'd located a crucial property deed in under 5 minutes. Dorothy was wonderful, but she kept everything in her head. If you asked her where something was, she knew. But if Dorothy wasn't available, we were lost. "That's why systems are important," Edith replied. "They make knowledge transferable." What she didn't say was that systems also provided cover. By being exceptionally good at her job, she gave people a simple explanation for her presence. She was just the very competent archive clerk. Nothing more to see here. But the past had a way of intruding, even in peaceful Marshfield. It happened in unexpected moments. A news report about an attack in the Middle East would flash on the television, and Edith would find herself analyzing the tactical decisions, the intelligence failures, the probable aftermath. A thriller novel from the library would describe intelligence work, and she would note its inaccuracies with professional disdain. And then there were the dreams. They came 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes more. Always the same basic structure, though the details varied. She would be in the operations center, surrounded by computer screens and maps. Someone would ask her to verify intelligence. She would review the data, make her assessment, give her recommendation. Then the scene would shift to the aftermath, the destroyed apartment building, the bodies being carried out, the faces of children who would never grow up. And she would wake in her cottage on Maple Street, gasping for air, her sheets soaked with sweat. On particularly bad nights, she would get up and make tea, sitting in her kitchen until dawn, trying to convince herself that she had made the right decision by leaving that life behind. One such night, about 6 months after arriving in Marshfield, Edith sat at her kitchen table, staring at nothing. The dream had been especially vivid. She had seen the face of a little girl, maybe 7 years old, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to accuse her across the years. "I'm sorry," Edith whispered to the empty kitchen. "I'm so sorry." But apologies couldn't change the past. 18 people were still dead. Her resignation hadn't brought them back. Her self-imposed exile in Marshfield didn't balance the cosmic scales. So why had she come here? What did she think she was accomplishing? The question haunted her, but she had no good answer. Perhaps she simply needed to prove to herself that she could be someone other than the analyst who had made the fatal mistake. Perhaps she needed to live a life so small and controlled that she could never hurt anyone again. Or perhaps she was just hiding. Despite her internal struggles, Edith's external life continued to develop. By the end of her 2nd year in Marshfield, she had become a recognized, if not prominent, member of the community. She joined the town's beautification committee, which met monthly to discuss flower planting, park maintenance, and litter control. The chairwoman, Dolores Martinez, was a force of nature who had lived in Marshfield all 73 years of her life and knew everyone's business. "Edith, dear, we need you to organize our volunteer schedule," Dolores announced at one meeting. "You're so good with details." Edith created a spreadsheet that tracked volunteer commitments, scheduled activities, and budget expenditures. It was a simple task, but Dolores treated it like she'd performed a miracle. "This is exactly what we needed. Oh, you're wonderful." Through the beautification committee, Edith got to know more residents. She learned that Frank Morrison, who owned the hardware store, was a Korean War veteran who still did morning calisthenics at age 80. She discovered that the Henderson twins, who ran competing businesses on Main Street, hadn't spoken to each other in 15 years over a dispute about their father's will. She absorbed the social dynamics of Marshfield the way she had once absorbed intelligence briefings, noting alliances, understanding conflicts, recognizing power structures. Except here, the stakes were which family would host the 4th of July barbecue, not which terrorist cell was planning an attack. The low stakes were refreshing. Sheriff James Daniels became something close to a friend. He was in his mid-50s, a career lawman who had grown up in Marshfield, and returned after 20 years with the state police. He understood both small-town life and the wider world, which made him perceptive. They would sometimes have coffee at the diner, discussing town issues and current events. Daniels never pried into her past, but she sensed he knew there was more to her story. "You know what I appreciate about small-town policing?" he said one afternoon. "The problems are usually simple. Domestic disputes, property crimes, traffic violations. Nobody's trying to overthrow governments or commit acts of terrorism." Edith smiled. "That must be refreshing after state-level work." "It is, though sometimes I miss the complexity, the intellectual challenge of serious investigations." He looked at her meaningfully. "I imagine you understand that feeling." Moving from high-level government work to small-town archives. "I prefer the simplicity now," Edith replied carefully. "I had enough complexity in my previous career." "Fair enough." Daniels let it drop, but the knowing look in his eyes suggested he understood more than she had said. Margaret Chen became perhaps her closest friend. Margaret was divorced in her early 50s with a married daughter in Chicago. She was smart, kind, and had a gift for making people comfortable. They fell into a routine of having dinner together once a week, alternating between their homes. Margaret would share stories about her daughter's life, her work frustrations, her thoughts about dating again at her age. Edith would listen, offer advice, and share carefully selected anecdotes from her own life, stories that were true but incomplete. "Don't you ever get lonely?" Margaret asked one evening. "Living alone, no family nearby?" "Sometimes," Edith admitted. "But I've gotten used to my own company. And I have good friends here," she smiled at Margaret. "That helps more than you might think." "Well, you're stuck with me now," Margaret declared, "whether you like it or not." These friendships were real, Edith told herself. Just because they were built on partial truths didn't make the connection less genuine. These people cared about her, the her they knew, anyway. And she cared about them. It had to be enough. 18 years after arriving in Marshfield, Edith Paulson had settled into a comfortable routine that felt both satisfying and safe. At 65, she had the contentment of someone who had found her place in the world, even if that place was smaller than she had once imagined. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Marshfield Town Hall, casting long rectangles of golden light across the polished wooden floors. Edith adjusted her reading glasses and carefully placed another file folder into its designated spot on the metal shelving unit. The basement archive room was her domain, a quiet sanctuary where the town's administrative history lived in orderly rows of manila folders and bound volumes. She moved with the deliberate precision of someone who had learned long ago that haste often led to mistakes. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore her usual uniform of comfortable slacks and a cardigan over a simple blouse. To anyone who knew her in Marshfield, which was nearly everyone, she was simply Miss Paulson, the friendly archive clerk who could locate any document within minutes and who baked excellent apple pie for the town's annual harvest festival. "Morning, Edith," called Tom Richardson, the town clerk, as he descended the stairs with a stack of building permit applications. Tom had aged well over the 18 years she'd known him. More gray in his hair, a few more lines around his eyes, but still the same enthusiastic, dedicated public servant. "Got another batch for you. Seems like we're getting more development interest than usual this month." Edith smiled warmly. "Good morning, Tom. Just set them on the intake table. I'll process them this afternoon." Tom placed the folders down and stretched his back. "Don't know how you keep track of everything down here. Place is like a maze to me. Has been for the 25 years I've worked here." "It's all about the system," Edith replied gently. Every document has its proper place. Once you understand the logic, it becomes second nature. Well, thank God for you and your systems. Hey, you coming to the town council meeting tonight? They're voting on those speed bumps for Maple Street. I'll be there. I have some thoughts on emergency vehicle access that might be useful. After Tom left, Edith returned to her work. She found comfort in the predictability of her duties. Intake, categorize, file, retrieve when requested. The archive room was temperature-controlled, quiet, and demanded nothing more than attention to detail and patience, two qualities she possessed in abundance. It hadn't always been this way. As she filed a property deed from 1987, a fleeting memory crossed her mind. The fluorescent lights of a very different kind of room. Computer screens glowing with encrypted data. The weight of decisions that could alter the course of international events. She blinked and the memory dissolved. That was another life, another person. A person who had made terrible mistakes and paid for them with 18 years of self-imposed exile. But exile had become home. Marshfield wasn't a prison. It was a refuge. Around 11 o'clock, Margaret Chen came down with a question about a zoning map from the 1970s. Her reading glasses were perched on top of her head. She always forgot where she put them. Edith, I need the original plat map for the Riverside development. We've got someone wanting to subdivide, and I need to check the original restrictions. Edith located it within 3 minutes, pulling it from section 4B7 without needing to consult her catalog. You're a treasure, Edith, Margaret said warmly. Don't know what we'd do without you. Seriously, you should train someone to back you up. What happens when you decide to retire? I'm 65, Margaret. If I haven't retired yet, I'm probably not going to. Edith smiled. Besides, what would I do with myself? Garden all day? I'd go mad with boredom. You could travel. See the world. Didn't you say you always wanted to visit Scotland? Edith had said that, though it wasn't entirely true. She had already seen much of the world, just not as a tourist. Maybe someday. For now, I'm content here. After Margaret left, Edith made herself a cup of tea in the small break room she'd set up in a corner of the archive. The electric kettle, the small shelf with various teas, the 2 comfortable chairs, she'd brought these items in over the years, making the space her own. As the tea steeped, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. 65 years old. More than half her life spent in Marshfield now. The person she had been before, the intelligence analyst, the expert on Middle Eastern terrorist networks, the woman who had briefed generals and cabinet secretaries, felt like a character from a book she'd read long ago. Had she wasted her talents? Could she have done more good by staying in the intelligence community, learning from her mistakes, continuing to serve? These questions still haunted her occasionally, though less frequently than in the early years. She had made her choice, and she had lived with it. Most days, she believed it was the right choice. The lunch hour approached, and Edith climbed the stairs to eat her sandwich in the larger break room. Several other town employees were there, discussing the upcoming town council meeting and the proposal to add speed bumps on residential streets. "What do you think, Edith?" asked James Parker, one of the maintenance workers. James was relatively new, having started about 5 years ago, and he often sought her opinion on town matters. "You live on Maple. Would speed bumps help?" "I think it's worth considering," Edith said diplomatically. "Though I'd want to hear from the emergency services about response times. A few seconds delay might not matter for a speeding violation, but it could matter greatly for a heart attack victim." "That's a good point," Sarah Mitchell, now the senior administrative assistant, agreed. "Leave it to Edith to think of all the angles." This was her gift, offering reasonable perspectives without dominating conversations. She participated just enough to be considered part of the community, but not so much that anyone looked too closely. After lunch, Edith began processing the building permits Tom had brought. She worked methodically, checking each application for completeness, noting the property addresses, verifying that all required signatures were present, and filing them according to the established system. The third application made her pause. It was a request to renovate a commercial space at 247 Industrial Road, an old warehouse near the edge of town. The applicant was listed as Riverside Import-Export LLC, and they planned to convert the space into a storage and distribution facility. The application was complete, properly filled out, notarized, and yet something about it felt wrong. Edith couldn't immediately identify what triggered her unease. The company name was generic, but not unusually so. The purpose seemed legitimate. The paperwork was in order. All the required documentation was attached. Proof of insurance, contractor licenses, architectural plans. Still, her instincts she had tried to suppress for 18 years, whispered that something was off. She examined the application more closely. The registered agent was Michael Torrance with an address on Pine Street. The business had been incorporated in Delaware, which was common for privacy reasons. The renovation budget was listed as $40,000, which seemed reasonable for a warehouse conversion. Nothing obviously wrong. Nothing that would cause a normal person to give it a second thought. But Edith wasn't entirely normal, no matter how hard she tried to be. She told herself she was being paranoid. This was Marshfield, not Kabul or Damascus or any of the other places where her analytical skills had once been a matter of life and death. Here, an import-export company was just an import-export company. Not every business registration was a front for something sinister. She processed the application, stamped it with the received date, and filed it in the appropriate location. But that evening, as Edith walked home through the pleasant autumn streets, she couldn't shake the feeling. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, and children played in front yards while parents prepared dinner. Mrs. Henderson was setting out decorations for Halloween, now only 2 weeks away. Mr. Morrison was raking leaves in his yard, waving as she passed. This was the peace she had sought, the life she had chosen, the normalcy she had craved after years of high-stakes intelligence work. Why, then, did she feel the old shadow returning? Why did that simple business application nag at her consciousness like a loose thread that might unravel something larger? She tried to dismiss it as trauma response. After what had happened, after the operation that killed 18 people, it was natural that she would be hypervigilant, seeing threats where none existed. This was PTSD, not professional intuition. But there was a difference between the two, and after 18 years, she thought she could tell them apart. This wasn't panic. This was pattern recognition. And that frightened her more than anything. That night, Edith couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind working despite her best efforts to quiet it. She thought about the application. Riverside Import-Export LLC. Delaware Incorporation. Generic business name. Warehouse location on the industrial edge of town. Individually, these were all normal. Together, they formed a profile. Stop it, she told herself firmly. You're not an analyst anymore. You're an archive clerk. This is not your job. But what if it was? What if there really was something wrong, and she was the only one who could see it? She got up and made chamomile tea, sitting in her darkened kitchen, the only light coming from the street lamp outside. This was a familiar ritual. Sleepless nights, tea, the internal debate about whether her instincts could still be trusted. After the incident, she always thought of it as the incident, unable to name it more specifically even in her own mind. She had questioned everything about herself. If she could be so catastrophically wrong about intelligence that led to children's deaths, how could she trust any of her professional judgments? The official investigation had cleared her. The intelligence had been verified through multiple sources. The mistake had occurred during the execution phase. Wrong building, wrong timing, wrong everything. But Edith knew that if she had been more thorough, if she had demanded one more confirmation, if she had questioned one more assumption, those children might still be alive. So she had resigned, not because she was forced to, but because she no longer trusted herself. And now, 18 years later, those same analytical instincts were awakening, telling her something was wrong, that Riverside Import-Export LLC was more than it appeared to be. But could she trust those instincts? Or was she just a traumatized woman seeing phantoms? At 2 a.m, Edith finally fell into fitful sleep. She dreamed of file folders that multiplied endlessly, each one containing a face of someone who had died because of her. She tried to organize them, to create a system, but they kept multiplying faster than she could sort them. She woke at dawn, unrested and troubled. The next morning, Edith arrived at the town hall earlier than usual. She told herself it was to catch up on filing, but she knew the truth. She needed to look at that application again. In the quiet solitude of the archive before anyone else arrived, she could examine it without explaining herself. She retrieved the Riverside Import-Export file and spread it out on her desk. She examined every detail with the thoroughness she had once applied to intelligence briefings. The registered agent was someone named Michael Torrance, with a local address on Pine Street. She knew Pine Street. It was a modest neighborhood of rental houses near the elementary school. She pulled up the property records for the address. The house was owned by Gerald Porter, her own landlord, and it was listed as a rental. The current tenant had moved in 3 months ago. The business license had been issued 3 weeks ago. The renovation budget was listed as $40,000. The contractor was Atlas Construction Services. Edith pulled the file for Atlas Construction. They had registered as a business in Marshfield 6 weeks ago. Also a Delaware LLC. Also with a local registered agent, a woman named Jennifer Hayes, with an address on Elm Street. 2 new businesses, both using Delaware LLCs for privacy, both appearing in Marshfield within weeks of each other, both connected to this warehouse project. Edith leaned back in her chair. This could still be innocent. Business partners who knew each other, incorporating separately for liability reasons, working together on a project. Perfectly normal. But her instincts said otherwise. She began pulling other recent business registrations, telling herself this would be her final check. If she found nothing else suspicious, she would let it go. Over the next hour, working with the focused intensity she hadn't felt in years, she identified 6 new businesses that had registered in Marshfield in the past 3 months. 1. Riverside Import-Export LLC, registered September 1st. 2. Atlas Construction Services, registered August 15th. 3. Mountain View Property Management, registered August 1st. 4. Heritage Consulting Group, registered September 15th. 5. Summit Technical Services, registered October 1st. 6. Lakeside Investment Partners, registered October 10th. All registered through Delaware LLCs. All with registered agents who had local Marshfield addresses. All in different sectors: import-export, construction, property management, consulting, technical services, investment. Individually, unremarkable. Together, a pattern. Edith felt her heart rate elevate as the old analytical framework took over. She was conducting intelligence analysis on her own town. This was exactly what she had promised herself she would never do again. But she also recognized what she was seeing. The peculiar spacing of the registrations, the diversity of business types that could collectively provide cover for a wide range of activities. The use of privacy-focused legal structures. It was a textbook example of how to establish a coordinated operational presence while maintaining the appearance of independent business activity. Tom Richardson's voice calling her name from the top of the stairs jolted her back to reality. She quickly gathered the files and returned them to their proper places. "Down here, Tom." "Oh, good, you're early. Can you help me locate the town charter? Council member wants to check something about meeting procedures." "Of course, it's in the special documents cabinet." She helped Tom, maintaining her pleasant demeanor while her mind churned with the implications of what she had discovered. After Tom left, she forced herself to put the files away and focus on her regular duties. Throughout the day, she processed routine documents, helped residents locate birth certificates and property records, and maintained her usual efficiency. But her mind kept circling back to those 6 businesses, and a new detail she hadn't noted before, the timing of the registrations. They were spaced at roughly 2-week intervals, starting in early August. Sequential deployment. Establishing presence in phases. She was overthinking this. She had to be. That evening, she walked a different route home, one that took her past Pine Street. She located the address listed for Michael Torrance, the registered agent for Riverside Import-Export. It was a modest 2-bedroom rental house with a "for rent" sign in the yard and no car in the driveway. The house appeared vacant. A mail forwarding address, perhaps. Not illegal, but another small irregularity. Edith continued home, her mind working on the problem despite her best efforts to stop it. She made dinner, baked chicken and vegetables, and tried to watch a British mystery series she'd been enjoying, but couldn't focus. The question gnawed at her. Was she seeing a real threat, or was trauma making her paranoid? Finally, at 9 o'clock that evening, Edith did something she hadn't done in 18 years. She opened her laptop and began to research. She started with open-source information, the kind anyone could access. She searched for each business name, finding minimal online presence. Riverside Import-Export had a basic website with stock photos of warehouses and a generic description. Providing import-export services for businesses throughout the Midwest. No specific products, no client testimonials, no company history. Atlas Construction had a similarly bare-bones website. Stock photos of construction sites, vague promises of quality craftsmanship and timely completion. No portfolio of completed projects, no staff photos, no reviews on any platform. Mountain View Property Management's website listed several rental properties in Marshfield, but had no online reviews, no social media presence, no evidence of actual property management activity beyond the listings. This was more concerning. Legitimate businesses, especially new ones, typically worked hard to establish an online presence. They sought reviews, maintained social media, engaged with potential customers. These businesses seemed designed to exist on paper while remaining invisible online. Edith's hands trembled slightly as she typed. She was crossing a line, she knew. She had left the intelligence world, had promised herself she was done with suspicions and investigations and the terrible weight of knowing things. But what if she was right? What if something dangerous was building in Marshfield? What if she ignored it and people died? The memory came unbidden, as it always did when she thought about acting on intelligence. The briefing room, the photographs of the apartment building, the confident assessments that the target was valid, and then the aftermath. The bodies, the destroyed families, the knowledge that she had been part of the decision chain that led to those deaths. The official report had absolved her. Multiple intelligence sources had confirmed the apartment was being used by militants. The operation had been properly authorized. The failure had occurred in the execution phase. The wrong apartment, in the wrong building, at the wrong time. But Edith knew that absolution on paper didn't equal peace of mind. 18 people dead, 12 of them children. She had provided the intelligence. She had confirmed the target location, and she had been, in some fundamental way, wrong. She had resigned the next day, telling her supervisor Richard Deng that she could no longer trust her own judgment. "Edith, this wasn't your fault," he had said. "The intelligence was solid. This was an execution failure." "Then why do I see their faces every night?" she had replied. "Why can't I sleep without dreaming about those children?" Richard had tried to convince her to stay, to take time off, to see the agency therapist. But Edith had known that she was done. She couldn't bear the weight of life and death decisions anymore. Now, sitting in her quiet cottage in peaceful Marshfield, Edith faced an agonizing question. Was she seeing threats that didn't exist because of her traumatic past? Or was she detecting a genuine danger because of her hard-earned expertise? She closed her laptop without reaching a conclusion, but she knew she wouldn't be able to let this go. The analyst in her, the part she had tried to bury for 18 years, was fully awake now. And once awakened, it demanded answers. Over the following week, Edith waged a quiet internal battle. During work hours, she maintained her usual routine with iron discipline. She was friendly, helpful, efficient, everything the town expected of their reliable archive clerk. But in her spare time, she couldn't stop noticing things. On Wednesday, a man came in to file paperwork for Mountain View Property Management. He was in his early 30s, fit, polite, and utterly forgettable, which itself was noteworthy. Edith had learned long ago that truly forgettable people were often the most carefully constructed personas. People with nothing to hide tended to have distinctive characteristics, quirks, personal details that made them memorable. This man was aggressively average. Medium height, medium build, neutral clothing, neutral accent. He answered questions efficiently, but volunteered nothing extra. When Sarah Mitchell tried to make small talk about the weather, he responded politely but minimally. Edith processed his paperwork without comment, applications to register 3 rental properties in Marshfield. But afterward, she pulled the files and mapped the properties. They formed a rough triangle around downtown Marshfield. Each property was a single-family home, recently purchased, now being prepared as rentals. The purchase dates were within 2 weeks of each other, all in late September. Strategic positioning? Or random real estate investment? On Thursday evening, Edith attended the town council meeting, as she had told Tom she would. The speed bump proposal passed after lengthy debate about emergency vehicle response times. Her suggested concern had proven pivotal. After the meeting, as residents filed out, she overheard a conversation between two men she didn't recognize. "Timeline should be clear by mid-November," one was saying in low tones. "Assuming the deliveries arrive on schedule," the other replied. Normal business conversation. Except something about the way they positioned themselves, scanning the room while talking, maintaining awareness of who was nearby, felt professional, trained. Edith was careful not to stare or obviously listen. She gathered her things slowly, catching fragments of their conversation. "Verification process is taking longer than expected. Can't rush it. We need everything clean." They left together, getting into separate cars in the parking lot. Tom Richardson noticed her watching. "New folks in town. Think one of them is with that import-export company. Seem nice enough." "I'm sure they are," Edith replied neutrally. That night, she documented what she had observed. Not in any electronic format. Old habits made her wary of digital footprints. But in a small notebook she kept locked in a drawer. She was probably being paranoid, creating a record of innocent business activities and random conversations. But if she wasn't paranoid, if her instincts were right, then documentation would be crucial. She had learned that lesson the hard way in her previous career. Intelligence analysis required meticulous documentation of sources, observations, and reasoning. It was the difference between useful intelligence and paranoid speculation. By Friday, Edith had identified another data point that strengthened her concerns. While processing utility connection requests, a routine administrative function, she noticed that several of the businesses had connected utilities on the same day, despite being at different locations and supposedly unrelated companies. Riverside Import-Export, Summit Technical Services, and Heritage Consulting had all activated electricity and internet service on September 20th. Different addresses, different types of businesses, same activation date. Coordinated timing suggested coordinated planning. Edith pulled the files for each business and laid them out on her desk after hours, when the building was empty. She created a timeline of every business registration, every property purchase, every utility connection, every document filed with the town. The pattern became clearer. These businesses weren't random new arrivals. They were a coordinated network, carefully timed, strategically positioned, with interlocking relationships and synchronized activities. But a network for what purpose? Import-export could be legitimate, or could be a cover for moving materials or people. Property management could be legitimate, or could be establishing safe houses and staging areas. Consulting and technical services could be legitimate, or could provide covers for surveillance and planning activities. She needed more information, but the archive only contained official documents. To go further, she would need to do something she had sworn never to do again. Field observation. The thought made her stomach clench. Fieldwork meant risk. It meant potentially exposing herself. It meant making judgments in real time without the ability to fully verify and analyze. It meant being an intelligence operative again, even if only temporarily. Edith locked the files away and went home, still undecided. That night, the dreams came back. The apartment building, the children's faces, the weight of decisions that kill. She woke at 3 a.m., her decision made. She would conduct limited, careful observation, just enough to determine if the threat was real or if she was chasing shadows created by trauma. And if the threat was real, she would contact the appropriate authorities anonymously. No direct involvement, no revealing her identity, just enough to ensure someone was paying attention. It was a compromise between her moral obligation to act and her deep fear of being wrong again. Monday morning arrived cold and overcast, the November sky a flat gray. Edith dressed warmly and walked to work, deliberately taking a route that passed by the warehouse at 247 Industrial Road. The renovation work had begun. A truck from Atlas Construction was parked outside, and she could see workers moving inside through the open bay door. Everything appeared normal. Workers in hard hats and reflective vests, building materials stacked nearby, the sounds of power tools and construction. Except that one of the workers was standing apart from the others, not working, just watching the street, with a level of attention that seemed excessive for a construction site. He wasn't checking his phone or taking a break. He was actively surveilling the area, his eyes scanning systematically from one end of the street to the other. Edith kept walking at her normal pace, not changing her gait or giving any indication she had noticed. But she cataloged the details. The man's approximate age, early 30s. Build, fit, military bearing. And position, optimal sightline to the street and approach routes. A security guard would be stationed near the entrance or inside. A construction foreman would be checking work progress. This man was performing counter-surveillance. At work, she filed documents and assisted visitors, her mind analyzing what she had observed. The watching worker could be a security guard hired to prevent theft from the construction site. Or he could be a lookout, part of a security protocol for an operational cell. During her lunch break, Edith walked to the small diner on Main Street. She ordered her usual, vegetable soup and a roll, and sat by the window, from which she could see the office building that housed Summit Technical Services. Over the course of an hour, she observed 3 different men enter and exit the building. All wore business casual attire, slacks, button-down shirts, no ties. All carried laptop bags or briefcases. They came and left at irregular intervals, never together. None stayed longer than 20 minutes. Brief meetings? Dead drop activities? Or simply a very inefficient technical services office? "More coffee, hun?" asked Linda, the waitress who had worked at the diner for 30 years. "Yes, please," Edith replied, maintaining her pleasant demeanor even as her analytical mind catalogued every detail. Linda poured the coffee and lingered. "You feeling okay? You seem a little preoccupied today." Edith forced a smile. "Just a busy week ahead. Town council wants a comprehensive audit of the archive system. Going to keep me on my toes." "Well, don't work too hard. You deserve to enjoy your retirement years, not spend them buried in that basement." After Linda moved on to other customers, Edith continued her observation. The 4th person to visit Summit Technical was a woman, early 40s, professional appearance. She emerged after 15 minutes and drove away in a dark blue sedan. Edith made a mental note of the license plate, a habit from her old life that she hadn't been able to break. That evening, after work, Edith took a different walking route home, one that passed by 2 of the properties owned by Mountain View Property Management. Both houses appeared occupied, lights on, cars in driveways, curtains drawn. Completely normal residential properties. Except that the same model car, a dark blue sedan, different from the one at Summit Technical but the same make and model, was parked at both locations. Different license plates, but identical vehicles. Fleet cars? Possible. Many property management companies used fleet vehicles for their maintenance staff, or a sign that the same organization was operating multiple locations under different covers. Edith continued her observations over the next several days, varying her routes and timing, never lingering anywhere, never taking photographs, or doing anything that might draw attention. Just a 65-year-old woman walking through her town, occasionally pausing to admire a garden or to nod at neighbors. But she was seeing patterns. The same group of approximately 15 to 20 individuals rotated between the various business locations. They were careful never to gather in large groups, maintaining the appearance of separate operations. But she recognized faces appearing at different sites on different days. The people themselves were demographically diverse, different ages, ethnicities, genders, builds, but they shared certain subtle characteristics that someone without intelligence training might not notice. Physical fitness beyond what their supposed jobs would require. Situational awareness. They scanned environments reflexively, noted exits, positioned themselves with tactical awareness. Minimal casual social interaction with actual town residents. Controlled body language and neutral facial expressions. Communications that stopped when others approached. They were living in Marshfield, but not engaging with the community. They shopped at the grocery store, but made minimal conversation. They drove local roads, but didn't wave at neighbors. They existed in the town, but not of it. They were maintaining operational security, trying to blend in while avoiding the kind of deep integration that might compromise their activities. It was a difficult balance, and to Edith's trained eye, the very effort to appear normal made them stand out. On Thursday evening, Edith was walking past the public park when she saw two of the individuals she had been observing. They sat on a bench, appearing to have a casual conversation, but their body language suggested a briefing. One was gesturing with precise hand movements, not the flowing gestures of casual talk, but the controlled gestures of someone communicating specific information. The other listened intently, nodding occasionally, asking brief questions. As Edith walked past at a distance, pushing her shopping cart from the grocery store, one of them glanced her way. Their eyes met for just a moment before both looked away. Had she been too obvious? Had she compromised herself? Edith continued walking at a steady pace, her heart pounding but her expression neutral. She had operated in far more dangerous environments than a peaceful park in Marshfield. She had walked past armed militants in Karachi and Baghdad without revealing her purpose. A glance from a possible operative in a small-town park was nothing. But it reminded her of the stakes. If these people were what she increasingly suspected they were, some kind of pre-operational cell, they would be trained to detect surveillance. She would have to be extraordinarily careful. That night, Edith lay awake, staring at her ceiling, weighing her options. She had enough evidence to suggest coordinated, suspicious activity, but nothing concrete enough to take to local police. Sheriff Daniels was a good man and a competent law officer, but he lacked experience with anything beyond local crime. Going to him with vague suspicions would accomplish nothing except possibly alerting the very people she was watching. She could contact the FBI, but doing so would require explaining how a small-town archive clerk had conducted an intelligence-level analysis of local business patterns. It would mean revealing her background, undergoing questioning, possibly being pulled back into the world she had fled. And there was still the possibility, however slim, that she was wrong. That trauma and paranoia had turned innocent business activity into a phantom threat. She needed definitive proof, something concrete, something that would justify the upheaval her intervention would cause. The answer came to her suddenly. The warehouse. If this was an operational cell, the warehouse would be their primary facility. That's where any preparations would occur, where materials would be stored, where the actual evidence would exist. She would need to find a way to see inside that warehouse. The next morning, Edith arrived at the town hall with a plan. It was risky, but she had calculated the angles and believed it was manageable. The key was maintaining her cover while creating a legitimate reason to access the warehouse. She found Tom Richardson in his office, reviewing budget reports and looking harassed. "Tom, I have a favor to ask," she said, keeping her tone casual and professional. "The archive needs better climate control. The humidity levels fluctuate too much in the summer, and it's affecting some of the older documents. I was hoping to see how the new warehouse renovation at Industrial Road is handling their environmental systems. They're converting a similar old structure, and I thought it might give us some ideas. Would it be possible to schedule a brief inspection visit? Professional interest, really." Tom looked up, surprised but not suspicious. "The Riverside Import-Export place? I suppose that would be fine. Good thinking, actually. Let me call and arrange it." "Oh, don't go to any trouble," Edith said quickly, hoping to maintain control of the situation. "I could just stop by myself, maybe this afternoon. Just a quick look." But Tom was already reaching for his phone. No, I should probably come with you. Official visit and all that. Plus, I'm curious to see what they're doing with that old warehouse. Been vacant for years. How about tomorrow morning? I'll let them know we're coming." Edith smiled graciously while internally adjusting her plan. Having Tom along would limit what she could observe, but it also provided better cover. A town clerk and an archive clerk conducting an official visit was more credible than an elderly woman showing up alone asking questions. "That would be wonderful. Thank you, Tom." The next morning, Edith dressed professionally but practically. Comfortable shoes, a cardigan with pockets, her reading glasses on a chain. She carried a small notebook, as would be natural for someone evaluating climate control systems. Tom picked her up at the town hall in his personal vehicle, a 10-year-old Honda Accord that he claimed would run forever if you just maintained it properly. He chatted about town business as they drove, unaware of the tension coiled inside his companion. "You know, it's good for the town having new businesses come in," Tom said. "We've been losing population for a decade. Any economic activity is welcome." "As long as they're good corporate citizens," Edith replied carefully. "True enough, though they seem fine so far. All their paperwork has been in order, and they've been polite in their interactions with the office." They arrived at the warehouse at 9:30 a.m. The construction work was clearly ongoing. The parking lot was being repaved, and workers were visible through windows. A temporary sign announced Riverside Import-Export LLC, opening soon. They were met at the main entrance by a man who introduced himself as David Palmer, operations manager for Riverside Import-Export. He was in his mid-30s, fit and clean-cut, with a firm handshake and a rehearsed smile. Welcome, he said smoothly. "Always happy to show community officials around. We want to be good neighbors." Palmer's affect was professional and friendly, but Edith noted several tells. His eyes scanned them carefully, not just looking, but assessing. His handshake was firm but controlled, the grip of someone trained in hand-to-hand combat who had learned to moderate it. His stance was balanced, weight-centered, ready to move. Former military? Private security? Or something else? As Palmer gave them a tour, Edith observed everything while appearing to focus only on climate control issues. The warehouse had been partitioned into several distinct sections. One area was set up with office cubicles and computer workstations, at least 20 of them, which seemed excessive for a small import-export operation. The computers appeared to be high-end models, and she noted sophisticated networking equipment in a partially open closet. Another section contained rows of metal shelving, currently empty but clearly being prepared for storage. The shelving units were industrial grade, capable of holding significant weight. A third section was still under renovation, with workers installing drywall and electrical systems. And a fourth section, the one Palmer steered them away from, had several rooms with keypad-locked doors. "What about climate control?" Edith asked, playing her role. "I noticed you have independent HVAC zones." "Yes, different products require different environmental conditions," Palmer replied smoothly. "Some of our imports are temperature-sensitive electronics. We need to maintain consistent conditions." It was a reasonable answer, delivered with confidence. But Edith noticed a micro-expression cross Palmer's face, a brief tightening around his eyes, a barely perceptible pause before answering. He was lying, or at least concealing something. "Makes sense," Edith said, making notes in her notebook. "And what about humidity control?" Palmer led them to a mechanical room where the HVAC systems were housed. He explained the setup with more detail than seemed necessary, as if eager to demonstrate technical knowledge. Tom asked questions about costs and energy efficiency. As they toured, Edith counted security cameras. She spotted at least 12, all professional installations with good coverage. Far more than a typical warehouse would need. "And this area?" Tom gestured to the locked section. "Server room and record storage," Palmer said easily. "Company policy is restricted access for data security. I'm sure you understand. We handle sensitive information about our suppliers and clients." Of course," Tom agreed. But Edith noted that one of the locked rooms had specialized power connections visible through a partially open door, the kind used for heavy computing equipment or specialized machinery. Not standard record storage. They completed the tour and thanked Palmer for his time. As they drove back, Tom seemed satisfied. "Seems like a solid operation," he said. "Could bring some good jobs to Marshfield." Palmer said they're planning to hire locally once they're fully operational. "That would be wonderful for the town," Edith agreed politely. But her mind was cataloging what she had observed. The excessive computer infrastructure, the sophisticated security system, the restricted areas with specialized power systems. Palmer's controlled demeanor and subtle signs of counter-surveillance awareness. None of this proved criminal activity. A legitimate import-export business might have exactly this setup: computers for inventory and logistics, security for valuable goods, restricted areas for proprietary information. But combined with everything else she had observed, the coordinated business registrations, the rotating personnel, the tactical awareness of the supposed employees, it added up to something that felt very wrong. That afternoon, back in the archive, Edith made a decision that both frightened and liberated her. She needed to access information beyond what was available through official channels. She needed to use capabilities she had promised herself she would never use again. Late that evening, in the privacy of her cottage, Edith opened her laptop and did something she hadn't done in 18 years. She accessed the deep web using protocols she had learned in her previous life. She was careful, routing her connection through multiple VPNs, using Tor browsers, leaving no trace that could be connected to her real identity or location. These were skills that, like riding a bicycle, you never truly forgot. She started by searching for references to the businesses registered in Marshfield, looking in databases that ordinary citizens couldn't access: import records, corporate registration networks, financial transaction patterns. The search took hours. She worked methodically, following threads, documenting connections, building a comprehensive picture. What she found made her blood run cold. Riverside Import-Export had indirect connections to a shipping company that had been investigated 3 years ago for smuggling, but never charged due to insufficient evidence. The investigation had been dropped, but the company remained flagged in certain law enforcement databases. Atlas Construction had been incorporated by someone named Frank Morrison, not the hardware store owner, a different Frank Morrison, who had previously worked for a company that had been linked to a militia group in Montana. The connection was tenuous. He'd been a subcontractor, not a member, but it was there in the records. Mountain View Property Management's registered owner, when traced through the Delaware LLC structure, led to a shell corporation that had previously been associated with money laundering investigations in Florida. Again, no charges, but the pattern existed. Heritage Consulting's business bank account showed financial transactions with companies in countries known for weak financial oversight, places where money could be moved and cleaned relatively easily. None of this proved current criminal activity. These were past associations, possibly coincidental, possibly evidence of learning from previous mistakes and going legitimate. But the pattern was clear and deeply troubling. Edith sat back from her computer, her hands shaking. She had crossed multiple lines tonight. She had conducted illegal searches. She had used classified techniques. She had accessed databases she had no authorization to access. She had become, once again, what she had been before. And she still didn't have definitive proof that would stand up in court or justify FBI intervention. Everything she had found was circumstantial: suspicious associations, questionable patterns, troubling connections. But no smoking gun. No concrete evidence of an actual crime being planned. She needed something more, something undeniable. The fraudulent invoice she would discover later would provide that evidence. But for now, in the late hours of this November night, Edith Paulson sat in her quiet cottage and felt the weight of impossible decisions pressing down on her. If she was right, she had a moral obligation to act, to use every tool at her disposal to prevent whatever these people were planning. If she was wrong, she was a paranoid woman violating laws and privacy, seeing threats that existed only in her traumatized mind. How could she know which she was? The only way to be certain was to keep investigating, to gather more evidence, to prove or disprove her theory before taking any irreversible action. Edith closed her laptop and sat in darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of her neighborhood. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. A car drove past, likely someone coming home late from work. Normal sounds of normal life. She thought about the 18 people who had died because of her faulty intelligence. Their faces haunted her still, appearing in dreams and quiet moments. The burden of that mistake had driven her to Marshfield, to this small life, to 18 years of careful obscurity. Now she faced a terrible possibility: that running from that mistake might have been the wrong choice. That her skills, her training, her hard-won expertise might be needed one more time. Not to make up for past failures, nothing could do that, but to prevent future ones. The break came from an unexpected source: routine administrative work that Edith had performed thousands of times over 18 years. On Monday morning, Margaret Chen brought down a stack of invoices for filing. Town departments regularly submitted invoices for services rendered, and the archive maintained records of all town expenditures, a mundane but necessary administrative function. As Edith processed them with her usual careful attention, one invoice caught her eye. It was from Summit Technical Services, billing the town for IT consulting services for the police department. The amount was $1,200 for network security assessment performed in October. Edith frowned. She knew the police department's IT needs were handled by a county contractor under a long-term service agreement. She had filed that contract herself 3 years ago and processed the quarterly invoices regularly. Why would they hire an outside consultant for network security? She set the invoice aside and continued processing the others, but it nagged at her consciousness like a grain of sand in an oyster, irritating and persistent. During her lunch break, instead of going to the break room, Edith called Sheriff Daniels's office, ostensibly about a completely different matter. "Sheriff's office, this is Deputy Miller." "Hi, Jenny, it's Edith Paulson from the town hall. Is the sheriff available? I have a quick question about budget reconciliation." "Just a moment, Miss Paulson." Sheriff Daniels came on the line. "Edith, what can I do for you?" "Sheriff, I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm processing invoices and I have one here from Summit Technical Services for IT consulting. It's listed as network security assessment for your department. Do you recall authorizing this service?" There was a pause. Edith could hear papers shuffling in the background. "Summit Technical? No, I don't think so. Our IT is handled by county services through that contract we set up a few years back. Let me check my records. No, I don't have any authorization for outside consulting. Could be a billing error. What's the amount?" $1,200. That's not nothing. Can you send me a copy of the invoice? I'll look into it. Of course, I'll email it right over. After hanging up, Edith examined the invoice more carefully. It appeared legitimate, printed on town letterhead, proper formatting, all the correct administrative codes. The authorization signature was listed as Deputy Mayor Richard Hastings. But Edith had processed hundreds of documents with Richard Hastings's signature. She knew the peculiarities of his handwriting, the way he looped his R's, the distinctive flourish on his H, the slight rightward slant of his script. This signature was close, very close. Someone had studied it and replicated it with considerable skill. But it wasn't quite right. The loop on the R was slightly too round. The H flourish was fractionally shorter, details that most people would never notice. Edith felt her pulse quicken. This was it. This was concrete evidence of criminal activity, fraud against the town. But why would a supposed terrorism cell risk exposure for $1,200? That made no sense, unless they were testing the system. The realization hit her like cold water. They weren't after the $1,200. They were testing whether they could successfully process fraudulent paperwork through town systems. Testing whether their forged authorization would be caught. Testing the town's verification procedures and internal controls. And if they could forge invoices and authorizations, what else could they forge? Permits? Credentials? Official documents that could provide access or legitimacy for a larger operation? Edith's mind raced through the implications. If they needed the ability to manipulate local administrative systems, what were they planning that would require such access? She thought about the warehouse, the sophisticated computer systems, the restricted areas. She thought about the rotating personnel, the coordinated business registrations, the tactical awareness. This wasn't just a cell planning a single operation. This was a group establishing comprehensive infrastructure for sustained operations, perhaps multiple operations. The $1,200 wasn't the crime. It was practice for the real crime. Edith spent the rest of the afternoon working with deliberate normalcy, processing documents and assisting visitors. But her mind was working furiously. She had her proof now: documented fraud, a concrete crime that she could report to authorities without having to explain extensive intelligence analysis. But to whom should she report it? Local police? The sheriff was a good man, but this was beyond his scope. State police? Possible, but by the time they investigated and understood the broader pattern, it might be too late. FBI? That would mean revealing her capabilities, her background, her identity. That evening, Edith sat in her kitchen, the fraudulent invoice on the table in front of her, and faced the decision she had been avoiding for weeks. She could report the invoice through normal channels, tell Tom, let the town handle it as a fraud case, wash her hands of the broader implications, stay safe in her small life. Or she could do what she knew needed to be done: contact someone who would understand the full picture, who had the resources to investigate properly, who could act before something terrible happened. She thought about the 18 faces from her nightmares, the children who had died because of her mistake. She thought about the potential victims of whatever this cell was planning. How many faces would haunt future nightmares if she failed to act? At 8 o'clock that evening, Edith made her decision. She pulled out the burner phone she had purchased earlier that week, paid for in cash, activated with a prepaid plan, untraceable to her identity. She dialed a number she had memorized 18 years ago, never expecting to use it again. "Richard Dung," came the familiar voice after 4 rings. Edith closed her eyes, feeling the weight of crossing back over the threshold she had sworn never to cross again. "Richard, it's Edith Paulson." The long pause on the other end spoke volumes. "Edith? My God, it's been 18 years?" "Yes, I'm sorry to call out of the blue, Richard. I need advice, off the record." His voice shifted immediately from surprise to professional concern. "Of course. Are you all right?" "I'm fine personally, but I've observed something concerning, and I need to know if I'm being paranoid or if my instincts are correct." "Go ahead, I'm listening." Edith spent the next 30 minutes carefully outlining everything she had observed. She presented it as an intelligence analyst would, systematically, starting with the initial anomaly, building through observations and data points, connecting patterns, showing the progression of her investigation. She provided just enough detail for professional assessment, without revealing sources or methods that could compromise her current identity. She told him about the coordinated business registrations, the suspicious personnel patterns, the warehouse operation, the fraudulent invoice. She presented facts, not speculation, though she did share her analytical assessment of what the facts suggested. Richard listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of acknowledgement. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Edith, where are you located?" he asked finally. "Small town, Midwest. I'd rather not specify over an open line." "Of course. Listen to me carefully. What you're describing fits the profile of a pre-operational cell. The coordination, the multiple business fronts, the geographic positioning, the testing of local administrative systems. It's textbook preparation for significant action. The kind of thing we'd want to investigate immediately." Her heart sank. She had hoped he would tell her she was being paranoid, that she was seeing patterns where none existed, that she should let it go. "I need to pass this up the chain," Richard continued, "but I need specifics: location, names, business identities, copies of the evidence you've gathered. Richard, if I provide that, there will be an investigation. Federal agents will descend on my town. My identity will be revealed. I've built a life here. These people trust me. They think I'm just their archive clerk. I understand the cost, Edith. I really do. But if you're right, and based on what you've told me, I think you are, lives are at stake. Not just in your town, but potentially well beyond, depending on what they're planning. Edith stood and walked to her window, looking out at the peaceful street. Mrs. Henderson was walking her terrier. The Wilson kids were playing basketball in their driveway under the streetlight. Normal life, happening all around her. Life that might be shattered if this cell executed whatever operation they were planning. "Can you guarantee the investigation will be discreet?" she asked quietly. "That the locals won't know I was the source?" "I know I'm asking for a lot, but—" "I can't guarantee anything, Edith. You know how these things work. But I'll do my absolute best to protect your identity. I'll make sure the investigators understand the sensitivity. We have protocols for protected sources. Even retired sources who technically shouldn't have been conducting investigations in the first place?" Richard's voice softened. "Especially those. You saw something. You analyzed it using skills you legitimately possess, and you're reporting it to appropriate authorities. You haven't broken any laws that I can see. You're doing the right thing." Edith closed her eyes. The right thing. Such a simple phrase for such a complicated decision. "Give me 24 hours, she said. "I need to compile everything properly, verify a few more details. I'll send you a comprehensive report through secure channels, the old protocols we established. Those protocols are still active. I'll be waiting. And Edith, thank you. I know this isn't easy." After the call ended, Edith sat in darkness, feeling the familiar weight settling onto her shoulders. The weight of knowledge. The weight of responsibility. The weight of decisions that could save lives or ruin them. She had spent 18 years trying to put down that weight. Now she was picking it up again. But this time, she told herself, it would be different. This time she had evidence, not just intelligence assessments. This time she would let the professionals handle it. She would provide the information and step back. No direct involvement, no operational decisions. Just reporting what she knew to those who could act on it. It was a compromise between her moral obligation and her deep fear of being wrong again. She spent the next 3 hours compiling her report, working with the same methodical precision she had once applied to intelligence briefings. Every observation was documented. Every data point was sourced. Every connection was explained with supporting evidence. She included scanned copies of the business registrations, the fraudulent invoice, the property records. She created a timeline showing the coordinated activities. She mapped the locations of businesses and properties, showing the strategic positioning. She did not include information from her illegal database searches. That would raise questions about how she obtained it and potentially taint the investigation. She stuck to information that could have been gathered through legitimate observation and public records. When she finished, just after midnight, she had created a comprehensive intelligence report that would have met the standards of her former agency. It was clear, thorough, analytical, and properly sourced. She encrypted the file using the old protocols Richard had mentioned and sent it through a secure channel to his classified email address. Then she deleted her temporary files, cleared her browser history, and shut down her computer. It was done. She had set events in motion that couldn't be stopped. Now all she could do was wait and hope she had made the right decision. 3 days passed with agonizing slowness. Edith continued her normal routine, maintaining her pleasant demeanor at work while internally consumed with anxiety and second-guessing. Had Richard taken her seriously? Was an investigation underway? Or had her report been dismissed as the paranoid imaginings of a traumatized former analyst who should have stayed retired? She performed her duties with mechanical precision, filing documents, retrieving records, assisting residents. Tom commented that she seemed unusually quiet, and she blamed it on a mild head cold. "You should take a day off," he suggested kindly. "I'm fine, really. Work keeps my mind occupied." If he only knew what was occupying her mind. On Thursday afternoon, 2 people came to the town hall requesting property records for several commercial buildings in Marshfield. They were well-dressed, professional, claiming to represent a real estate development company researching investment opportunities in small Midwestern towns. But Edith recognized them immediately for what they were. They moved like federal agents, the specific way they scanned a room upon entering, maintaining awareness of all exits and occupants. The position of their hands, never far from where weapons would be concealed. The practiced casualness that was actually heightened readiness. She had worked with enough federal agents in her previous life to recognize the type. The woman was in her early 40s, brunette, sharp eyes that didn't miss details. The man was younger, maybe 35, fit, with the kind of neutral appearance that made him forgettable, exactly what you wanted in surveillance work. "Can I help you?" Edith asked, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "Yes, we're looking for property records for several commercial buildings," the woman said, handing over a list. "We're conducting preliminary research for possible investment." Edith took the list and examined it. The addresses included the warehouse, the Summit Technical Office Building, and several other locations associated with the suspicious businesses. "Of course. These are all in our public records. Let me pull those for you. It will take about 15 minutes. "We appreciate it," the man said with a pleasant smile. As Edith descended to the archive, her mind raced. Federal agents were now in Marshfield, beginning their investigation. Richard had acted on her report. This was really happening. She gathered the requested records, photocopying them efficiently. When she returned upstairs, the 2 agents were making small talk with Sarah at the front desk, asking about good restaurants in town, local hotels, the usual questions visitors might ask. Perfect cover. "Here you are," Edith said, handing over the documents. "Is there anything else I can help you with?" "This is perfect, thank you," the woman said, taking the papers. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Edith saw recognition there. Not of her identity, but recognition that Edith understood what they were. A silent acknowledgement passed between them. "We know you know, and you know we know you know." Then the moment passed, and they were just visitors again, thanking her for her help and leaving with their documents. After they left, Edith returned to the archive, her hands slightly unsteady. It had begun. The investigation was real. Federal resources were being deployed to Marshfield. That evening, Richard called her burner phone. "The team is in place," he said without preamble. "They'll handle it from here. Your job is to maintain your normal routine and avoid any further independent investigation. Let the professionals do their work." "Understood." "Richard, thank you." "No, thank you, Edith. The preliminary assessment is that your analysis was accurate. This is a serious situation, and you may have prevented something catastrophic. The team is taking this very seriously." After the call ended, Edith sat in her kitchen feeling a mixture of validation and dread. Validation that her instincts had been correct, that she hadn't been paranoid or delusional. Dread at what this meant for Marshfield, for her quiet life, for the identity she had carefully constructed over 18 years. But mostly, she felt a strange sense of relief. The burden was no longer hers alone. She had passed it to people who had the resources and authority to handle it properly. Over the following week, Edith noticed subtle changes in Marshfield that probably only she would detect. More strangers appeared in town, all with plausible cover stories. A couple touring small towns considering where to retire. A freelance journalist writing about rural American life. An artist looking for scenic locations to paint. A consultant studying small-town business development. All had perfectly reasonable explanations for being in Marshfield. All stayed at the small bed and breakfast or the motor lodge on the highway. All asked questions and took photos and generally behaved like visitors would. But Edith recognized the pattern. A surveillance net was being laid over Marshfield, covering the targets from multiple angles while maintaining the appearance of normal town activity. The suspects appeared to notice nothing. They continued their routines, moving between their various business locations, working on the warehouse renovation, maintaining their cover stories. This suggested either that the federal surveillance was extremely professional, or that the cell was confident enough in their security to dismiss casual visitors as non-threatening. Edith forced herself to stay out of it. She performed her job, attended her regular activities, maintained her normal schedule. She volunteered at the library on Saturday. She went to church on Sunday. She had dinner with Margaret on Tuesday. "You seem distracted," Margaret observed over pasta. "Everything okay?" "Just thinking about the holidays," Edith lied. "Wondering if I should visit my cousin in Oregon this year." She had no cousin in Oregon, but it was a cover story she'd maintained for years. "That would be nice. You should go. You never take vacations." "Maybe I will." But Edith knew she wouldn't be going anywhere. Not until this situation resolved. She needed to be here, needed to see how it ended. She trusted the federal investigators, but she also knew from experience that even professional operations could go wrong. And if something went wrong in Marshfield, she might be needed. On Thursday afternoon, Sheriff Daniels came to the town hall looking troubled. Edith was upstairs, filing documents in the clerk's office, when she overheard his conversation with Tom. "Tom, we need to talk, privately." They went into the conference room and closed the door, but their voices carried through the old building's thin walls. "I've been visited by federal agents," Daniels was saying. "FBI. They're conducting an investigation into possible criminal activity in Marshfield." "What? What kind of criminal activity?" "They wouldn't give me specifics. National security matter, they said. But they asked about recent businesses, new residents, property transactions. They wanted access to our records." "Did you give it to them?" "Didn't have much choice. They had the legal authority." "Tom, something serious is happening in our town, and we don't know what it is." There was a long pause. "Should we be worried?" Tom asked finally. "They said there's no immediate danger to residents, but they ask me to be alert for anything unusual and to report it immediately. They gave me a phone number, direct line to the special agent in charge." Edith continued her work, filing papers with steady hands while her mind processed this development. The investigation was reaching a point where local authorities had to be brought in. That suggested the federal team was preparing for action, not just surveillance. How much longer until they moved? That evening, Edith was reading in her living room when she saw a dark sedan drive slowly past her house, then circle the block and pass again. On the third pass, it parked 2 houses down, engine off, lights out. Federal surveillance? Or had the cell noticed federal presence and was now conducting counter-surveillance? Edith closed her curtains and turned on the television, acting as she normally would. But she was acutely aware of the car outside, of the possibility that everything might be about to accelerate. She went to bed at her normal time but slept poorly, alert for any unusual sounds. At 3 a.m., she woke to the sound of car doors closing quietly outside. She moved to her window and carefully peered through a gap in the curtains. The dark sedan was gone. Had it been federal agents watching her house? Or cell members checking on their neighbors? She would probably never know. 10 days after sending her report to Richard, Edith was working in the archive when she heard raised voices upstairs. She climbed the stairs to find Sheriff Daniels and 2 federal agents she hadn't seen before in the lobby, having what appeared to be a tense discussion. "Jurisdiction requires notification," the sheriff was saying firmly. "This is my town, and I have a responsibility to protect these people." One of the agents, a woman in her late 30s with short blonde hair and hard eyes, was speaking in low, calm tones. "Sheriff Daniels, we appreciate your cooperation and your concern for your community, but this is a federal investigation involving national security. We need to maintain operational security. Premature disclosure could compromise the investigation and potentially put people at risk." National security? In Marshfield? The sheriff sounded incredulous. "What the hell is going on?" The agent glanced around the lobby, noting the other town employees who had stopped to listen. Edith stayed back near the stairway, not wanting to intrude but unable to help overhearing. "Is there somewhere private we can talk?" the agent asked. They moved into the sheriff's office and closed the door. Edith returned to the archive, but she could hear footsteps pacing above her, voices rising and falling, the sounds of serious discussion. 20 minutes later, the sheriff came down to the archive, looking shaken. "Edith, you have a minute?" "Of course, Sheriff." He closed the door, something he'd never done before, and sat down heavily in one of her visitor chairs. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Have you noticed anything unusual in the town? Anything about these new businesses, the people running them?" Edith's heart rate spiked, but she kept her expression neutral and concerned. "What kind of unusual things?" "The FBI seems to think there's some kind of criminal organization operating here. They asked me specifically about business registrations and new residents over the past few months." "That's very concerning," Edith said carefully. "But I'm not sure what I could have noticed. I just process paperwork." The sheriff studied her for a long moment. He knew her well after 18 years, knew she was more perceptive than she let on, knew she noticed details others missed. "If you do notice anything at all, I need you to tell me. Or tell the FBI directly. They left contact information." "I will, Sheriff. I promise." After he left, Edith sat alone in the archive, her hands trembling slightly. The investigation was reaching a critical phase. The net was tightening. Soon, very soon, the federal team would have to make a move, either to arrest the suspects or to prevent whatever operation they were planning. That afternoon, Tom Richardson came down looking worried. "Edith, have you noticed anything unusual in the records lately? The FBI asked me to review all recent document submissions for anything suspicious." This was exactly what Edith had been afraid of. If Tom looked closely at the invoices, he would find the fraudulent Summit Technical billing. And if he found it, and reported it through normal channels, it might alert the cell that they'd been discovered. "What kind of unusual things?" she asked. They weren't specific, just irregularities, I guess. Paperwork that doesn't look right, authorization issues, that kind of thing. Edith made a decision. "Tom, let me help you with that. I know the records better than anyone. We can review everything together, make sure we catch anything that might be important." "Would you? That would be a huge help." They spent the next 2 hours reviewing documents, with Edith carefully steering Tom away from the fraudulent invoice while noting other minor irregularities. A misspelled name here, an incorrect date there. Nothing significant, but enough to make their review look thorough. "I think we're good," Tom said finally. "I don't see anything that raises red flags, do you?" "Nothing significant," Edith agreed, technically telling the truth. The fraudulent invoice was significant, but she had already reported it through other channels. That night, Edith's burner phone rang. It was Richard. "Edith, things are moving faster than expected. The team discovered that the cell has accelerated their timeline. They're planning to execute their operation within the next 2 weeks. "What kind of operation?" "Attack on a federal building in a city about 100 miles from your location. The warehouse is being used to assemble materials and plan logistics. They've been conducting surveillance on the target for months." Edith felt sick. How many potential casualties? "Could be hundreds if they succeed. The building houses federal courts and FBI field offices. High-value target, maximum impact." "When will you move against them?" "Soon. Very soon. Within 72 hours. We need to catch them with evidence in place, but before they can execute. It's a narrow window." "Is there anything I should do?" "Maintain your routine. Act normal. If the cell has any suspicion that law enforcement is aware of them, they might scatter or accelerate further. We need them calm and confident until we're ready to move." After hanging up, Edith sat in her dark kitchen, processing the information. Hundreds of potential victims. A planned attack on federal facilities. And it was happening right here, in peaceful Marshfield, under the cover of legitimate businesses. She had been right. Her instincts had been correct. But the validation brought no satisfaction. Only horror at how close to disaster her town had come. Saturday morning arrived with unusual warmth for mid-November. Edith woke early, having slept poorly again, and made her usual breakfast: oatmeal with berries, black coffee, a slice of whole wheat toast. Through her kitchen window, she could see the familiar sights of her neighborhood waking up. Mr. Morrison was already out walking his dog. The Henderson twins were setting up for their competing yard sales, a monthly ritual where each tried to outdo the other despite their ongoing feud. Normal life, happening all around her. People who had no idea that federal agents were preparing to conduct a major operation against a terrorist cell operating in their town. Edith dressed carefully, choosing comfortable clothes suitable for whatever the day might bring. She had a feeling that today would be significant, though she had no specific information to support that feeling, just instinct born from decades of experience. She was supposed to volunteer at the library today, her usual Saturday routine. Patricia Vance would be expecting her. But as Edith prepared to leave her house, her burner phone vibrated with a text message from Richard. "Operation today. Stay home. Stay safe." Just 6 words, but they sent adrenaline coursing through her system. Today. They were moving today. Edith called the library and apologized to Patricia, claiming she wasn't feeling well and needed to rest. Patricia was understanding and told her to feel better. Then Edith settled in to wait, though for what exactly she wasn't sure. Around mid-morning, she noticed increased activity on the streets, more cars than usual for a Saturday. People who looked like residents but moved with purpose rather than the casual Saturday morning pace. Federal agents getting into position. Edith stayed inside, watching through her windows, her stomach knotted with anxiety. The sirens started just after 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Multiple police vehicles raced past Edith's house, heading toward the industrial area. Then more vehicles, unmarked cars, SUVs with federal plates, an ambulance as a precaution. Edith stood at her window, hands pressed against the glass, watching the convoy pass. This was it. The operation was happening. Her phone rang. Not the burner, but her regular phone. It was Margaret. "Edith, something's happening at that warehouse. Police everywhere. Are we safe? Should we stay inside?" "I'm sure it's fine, Margaret," Edith said, trying to sound calm. "Probably just a police operation. Best to stay inside until we know more." "I'm scared. This is Marshfield. Things like this don't happen here." "I know, but the police know what they're doing. Trust them." After Margaret hung up, Edith made a decision. She couldn't stay home, not knowing what was happening. She needed to see. She put on her jacket and walking shoes and headed toward the industrial area, keeping to side streets. She wasn't the only one. Other residents were emerging from their homes, drawn by curiosity and concern. A police perimeter had been established 3 blocks from the warehouse. Sheriff Daniels was there with his deputies, managing the growing crowd of residents. Edith stayed at the back of the crowd, listening to speculation and rumors. "I heard it's a drug bust." "No, someone said terrorism." "That can't be right, not in Marshfield." "What if it is? What if those people were planning something awful?" Sheriff Daniels addressed the crowd, his voice carrying authority and calm. "Folks, I need everyone to stay back behind the barriers. There's a federal law enforcement operation in progress. You're not in danger, but we need to keep this area clear." "What kind of operation?" someone shouted. "I can't provide details at this time. Please be patient and stay back." Edith watched as, over the next hour, the suspects she had been observing for weeks were led out of the warehouse in handcuffs. She recognized faces. David Palmer, the operations manager who had given her and Tom the tour. The man who had filed paperwork for Mountain View Property Management. The woman she'd seen at Summit Technical Services. One by one, they were brought out, searched, placed in federal vehicles. None of them resisted. They had been caught completely by surprise, without time to destroy evidence or scatter. The crowd murmured in shock as more and more suspects emerged. My God, how many of them were there? They all seemed so normal. I bought coffee from one of them at the diner. Edith counted 15 arrests in total. The entire cell, as far as she could tell, taken into custody simultaneously. As the operation continued, she noticed federal agents carrying out boxes of evidence, computers, documents. The warehouse was being thoroughly searched and cataloged. Sheriff Daniels moved through the crowd, reassuring residents, answering what questions he could. When he reached Edith, he stopped and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You knew," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "Didn't you?" Edith met his eyes. "I suspected something wasn't right. I reported my concerns to appropriate authorities." "How long ago?" "A few weeks." He studied her for a long moment. "You may have saved a lot of lives today, Edith. I don't know exactly what these people were planning, but the feds seem to think it was bad. Real bad. I'm just glad they were stopped." "Are you? Or are you glad you were right?" It was a perceptive question. Edith considered it carefully before answering. "I'm glad I was wrong about one thing, Sheriff. I was afraid my judgment couldn't be trusted anymore, that I was seeing threats where none existed. Being right about this, it's not satisfying. It's just sad. Sad that people would plan such harm. Sad that it nearly happened here, but glad that it was prevented. The sheriff nodded slowly. Fair enough. This stays between us for now. But when this is all over, you and I need to have a conversation about who you really are. I'd expect nothing less from a good sheriff. Edith stayed until the operation concluded, watching as the warehouse was secured and the suspects transported away. Then she walked home slowly, processing what had happened. Marshfield had come within weeks, perhaps days, of being the launching point for a major terrorist attack. The quiet town she had chosen as a refuge had harbored one of the most dangerous domestic threats in recent years. And she had helped stop it. By Sunday morning, Marshfield was in turmoil. News vans had arrived, parking along Main Street and interviewing shocked residents. Reporters stood in front of the warehouse, describing how a major terrorism investigation had unfolded in this quiet Midwestern town. The initial news reports were vague on details. Federal officials confirmed that suspects had been arrested in connection with planning a significant attack on federal facilities. The specifics were being withheld pending further investigation. But the mere fact of arrests of a terrorism cell operating in Marshfield was enough to dominate every conversation. Edith stayed inside most of Sunday, declining calls from concerned friends. She wasn't ready to perform normalcy while processing what had happened. On Monday, the town hall was closed to regular business. Federal investigators were conducting a comprehensive review of town records, looking for any other evidence or connections they might have missed. Edith was asked to come in to assist, along with Tom and other key staff. A new FBI agent she hadn't met before, a senior investigator named Jennifer Walsh, interviewed her in the archive room. Ms. Paulson, we need to review all business registrations and property transactions from the past 6 months. Can you walk us through your filing system? Of course, Edith replied. She spent several hours helping federal agents access records, playing her role as the helpful clerk perfectly. Agent Walsh was professional but thorough. Did you notice anything unusual about any of these businesses when they registered? Anything that stood out? Edith shook her head. They all seemed normal at the time. The paperwork was in order. I had no reason to suspect anything. And you've been working here how long? 18 years. I came to Marshfield after retiring from government administrative work. Agent Walsh made a note but didn't pursue the topic. Edith wondered if Richard had briefed the team about her background, asking them to protect her identity. The investigation continued throughout the week. Details emerged in carefully controlled press releases. The cell had been planning to attack a federal building in a nearby city. They had been gathering materials, conducting surveillance, and preparing for an operation that could have killed hundreds of people. The warehouse had contained extensive documentation, computers with encrypted communications, and preliminary materials for the attack. Marshfield residents were horrified and grateful. The federal agents had prevented a tragedy. But how had the cell been identified? How had the investigation begun? The official story, released to the press on Wednesday, was that an alert financial institution employee had noticed suspicious transactions and reported them to federal authorities, leading to the broader investigation. No mention was made of intelligence analysis or a local source. Richard had kept his word. But Edith knew the truth would eventually emerge. It always did. On Friday evening, 1 week after the arrests, Sheriff Daniels came to Edith's cottage. "We need to talk," he said simply. Edith let him in, offering tea, which he accepted. They sat in her living room, and for a few minutes, neither spoke. Finally, the sheriff broke the silence. "I've been the sheriff here for 23 years, Edith. I know this town, and I know people, and I know when someone is more than they appear to be." "Sheriff," he held up a hand, "let me finish. The FBI won't tell me how they identified the cell. They say it's classified. But I've been thinking about timing. The agents showed up about 2 weeks before the arrests, asking for property records. And you're the one who manages those records." "I'm just an archive clerk, Sheriff." "Are you?" "Because I did some digging. Before you came to Marshfield, there's very little information about you. It's like you appeared from nowhere 18 years ago with a generic resume and a vague story about government work." Edith felt her carefully constructed identity crumbling, but she kept her composure. "Sheriff, I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to tell me the truth. Did you identify those people? Did you figure out what they were doing?" She met his eyes, making a decision. He deserved honesty, even if she couldn't give him complete disclosure. "I noticed some irregularities in business registrations," she said carefully. "Patterns that seemed unusual. I reported my concerns to appropriate authorities. That's all I can say." "That's all?" The sheriff smiled slightly. "Edith, whoever identified that cell saved countless lives. The FBI says these people were weeks away from executing their attack. If someone hadn't noticed what they were doing—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "I'm glad they were stopped," Edith said quietly. "So am I. And I want you to know that Marshfield is grateful, even if most people will never know why." He stood to leave. "I won't tell anyone about this conversation. Your secret is safe with me. But I want you to know that we see you, Edith. Not just as the archive clerk, but as someone who protects this community. That makes you one of us, no matter what your resume says." After he left, Edith sat in her living room, tears streaming down her face. For 18 years, she had hidden who she was, afraid that her true identity would make her an outcast. But the sheriff's words suggested something different, that her service, however secret, had earned her a place in the community, that protecting people mattered more than where she came from or what mistakes she had made in her past. She was supposed to volunteer at the library today, her usual Saturday routine. Patricia Vance would be expecting her. But as Edith prepared to leave her house, her burner phone vibrated with a text message from Richard. "Operation today. Stay home, stay safe." Just 6 words, but they sent adrenaline coursing through her system. Today. They were moving today. Edith called the library and apologized to Patricia, claiming she wasn't feeling well and needed to rest. Patricia was understanding and told her to feel better. Then Edith settled in to wait, though for what exactly, she wasn't sure. Around mid-morning, she noticed increased activity on the streets. More cars than usual for a Saturday. People who looked like residents but moved with purpose rather than the casual Saturday morning pace. Federal agents getting into position. Edith stayed inside, watching through her windows, her stomach knotted with anxiety. The weeks following the arrests brought gradual transformation to Marshfield. The initial shock faded into a kind of collective pride. Their small town had been central to preventing a major attack. Federal officials held a press conference commending the community's cooperation with the investigation. Edith watched from her living room as the county sheriff, the mayor, and FBI representatives stood at podiums, fielding questions from reporters. Can you tell us how the investigation began? A reporter asked. The FBI spokesperson gave a practiced answer. Multiple sources of information led to this investigation. We're grateful for the vigilance of ordinary citizens who notice unusual activity and report it to authorities. Ordinary citizens. That was her. At least in the official story. Life gradually returned to normal, though forever changed. The warehouse was still sealed as a federal crime scene. The rental properties owned by Mountain View Property Management sat empty, their leases canceled. The other businesses simply vanished, their registrations revoked, their minimal assets seized. Marshfield had been scrubbed clean of the cell's presence, but the memory remained. Edith returned to her normal schedule at the town hall. She processed documents, retrieved records, maintained the archive. But she noticed subtle changes in how people treated her. Tom was more deferential, asking her opinion on matters beyond filing systems. Margaret seemed to understand without being told that Edith had played a role in the investigation. Sheriff Daniels nodded to her with quiet respect whenever they crossed paths. They didn't know the specifics, but they sensed something. And in a small town, sensing was often enough. In December, about a month after the arrests, Edith received an unexpected visitor at the town hall. Agent Jennifer Walsh came to the archive room, closing the door behind her. Ms. Paulson, I need to be direct with you. We know who you are. We know about your service career and your resignation 18 years ago. Edith felt her stomach drop, but kept her composure. I see. Your former supervisor, Richard Deng, briefed us on your background when you first reported your suspicions. He wanted us to understand the credibility and capabilities of the source. Your analysis was extraordinarily valuable. Without it, we likely wouldn't have identified the cell until it was too late. I'm glad I could help. Agent Walsh leaned forward. Ms. Paulson, or should I say Analyst Paulson, the intelligence community could use someone with your skills. This case proved that your analytical abilities are still sharp. Have you ever considered returning to service? The offer hung in the air between them. 18 years ago, Edith would have said an immediate no. The very thought of returning to that world would have triggered panic. But now, after successfully identifying a real threat and seeing it stopped before anyone was hurt, she felt different. Thank you for the offer, Agent Walsh, but no. My place is here in Marshfield. These people need their archive clerk more than the intelligence community needs another analyst. Agent Walsh smiled. I had a feeling you'd say that. But if you ever change your mind, the door is open. She stood to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, what happened 18 years ago, the operation that went wrong, wasn't your fault. I've read the classified after-action reports. The intelligence was solid. Multiple independent sources confirmed the target. The failure occurred during execution, when the assault team hit the wrong building. You did your job correctly. I know that intellectually, Edith said quietly. But knowing and accepting are different things. Are they? Because from what I've seen, you've used what you learned from that tragedy to prevent an even greater one. That's not running from your past. That's learning from it and doing better. That's growth. After Agent Walsh left, Edith sat alone in the archive room, turning those words over in her mind. Perhaps she had been thinking about it wrong all these years. She had seen her time in Marshfield as hiding from consequence, as cowardice disguised as retirement. But maybe it was something else. Maybe it was healing, growing, becoming someone who could bear the weight of difficult knowledge without being crushed by it. Someone who could make hard decisions without being paralyzed by fear of being wrong. Someone who had integrated her past rather than running from it. In January, 5 months after the arrests and approaching the new year, Edith found herself more integrated into Marshfield's community than ever before. She was asked to serve on the town's new Public Safety Committee, formed in response to the terrorism investigation. The committee's mandate was to review security protocols and improve coordination between local and federal law enforcement. Sheriff Daniels chaired the committee, and he insisted that Edith be included. "We need people who notice things, who pay attention to details," he told the town council. Edith Paulson has proven herself invaluable in that regard. The council agreed unanimously. At the first committee meeting, Edith found herself surrounded by local officials, business owners, and concerned citizens. They discussed emergency response plans, communication protocols, and how to balance security with maintaining Marshfield's welcoming character. Edith contributed thoughtfully, offering perspectives on risk assessment and pattern recognition without revealing the depth of her expertise. She framed suggestions in terms of common sense rather than intelligence methodology. "If we notice businesses that don't seem to have actual customers or operations, that's worth noting," she said. "Not to be suspicious of everyone, but to stay aware." "That makes sense," agreed Frank Morrison, the hardware store owner. "Basic awareness doesn't mean paranoia." The committee work was satisfying in unexpected ways. Edith was using her skills to help protect Marshfield, but in an open, community-oriented way, rather than through secret analysis. She was finally integrating all parts of herself: the analyst, the archive clerk, the community member. Margaret noticed the change. Over dinner one evening in February, she remarked, "You seem different lately. Happier, maybe? More settled?" Edith considered the observation. "I think I've finally figured out how to be myself here. All of myself. Not just the parts I thought people would accept." "We've always accepted you, Edith. All of you. Even the parts we didn't fully understand." "I know that now. It took me a while to believe it." They talked late into the evening, and for the first time in 18 years, Edith shared a bit more of her past. Not the classified details, but the broad strokes. That she had worked in intelligence analysis. That a terrible mistake had driven her to leave. That she had spent years trying to escape her own identity. Margaret listened without judgment, then reached across the table and squeezed Edith's hand. "You know what I think? I think you came to Marshfield for one reason, and you stayed for another. You came to hide, but you stayed because you found home." Edith felt tears welling up. Yes, that's exactly it. The trial of the arrested cell members began in March and lasted through early May. Edith followed the news coverage closely, watching as the full scope of their planning was revealed in court. The cell had been preparing for 2 years. They had meticulously planned an attack on a federal building that housed courts, FBI offices, and ATF facilities. The operation would have involved a large vehicle-borne explosive device during peak business hours. Estimated casualties: 200 to 400 people killed, hundreds more injured. The trial revealed how close they had come. The attack had been scheduled for late November, just 2 weeks after the arrests. If Edith had hesitated, if she hadn't reported her suspicions, if the federal investigation had moved any slower, the attack would have succeeded. Richard Dung called her during the trial proceedings. "Edith, I thought you should know. The director wanted me to convey his personal gratitude. The evidence presented at trial makes clear that your intervention saved several hundred lives. That's not hyperbole. That's documented fact." Edith closed her eyes, feeling the weight of that knowledge. How do I process that, Richard? How do I reconcile saving hundreds with the 18 I cost? You don't reconcile it. You can't put them on a scale and balance them. Both are true. Both matter. You made a mistake once, under complex circumstances, and you prevented a catastrophe later because of everything you learned from that mistake. The director also wanted me to tell you, Richard continued, that your service record has been updated. The classified citation you received after the incident has been annotated. It now reflects both the tragedy and your later contribution. Your career won't be remembered only for the operation that went wrong. It will be remembered for the entire arc, including your final act of service in retirement. After the call, Edith sat in her cottage, feeling something she hadn't felt in 18 years. A sense of completion. Not redemption. She knew the 18 deaths couldn't be redeemed. But perhaps acceptance that she was more than her worst moment. In June, nearly 8 months after the arrests, the mayor of Marshfield held a special town hall meeting. The trial had concluded with convictions on all counts. The cell members were facing life sentences. It was time for the community to formally recognize those who had contributed to the investigation. Sheriff Daniels received a commendation for his department's cooperation with federal authorities. Several town employees were recognized for their assistance in providing records and information. Then the mayor called Edith to the podium. Edith Paulson has been the backbone of our administrative operations for nearly 2 decades, the mayor said. Her meticulous record-keeping and attention to detail proved invaluable during the federal investigation. While we can't share all the specifics, much remains classified. We can acknowledge that Edith's work contributed significantly to the successful outcome. It is my honor to present her with the Community Service Award. Applause filled the room as Edith walked to the podium. She accepted the plaque. A simple thing, really, with her name engraved on polished wood. But it meant everything. "Thank you all so much," she said, her voice steady despite her emotions. "Marshfield has been my home for 18 wonderful years. It's been my privilege to serve this community. I believe we all have a responsibility to protect what we value, and I value this town and everyone in it. Thank you for welcoming me all those years ago and for trusting me to help keep our records and our community safe." More applause. Photos were taken. People congratulated her. Later, during the reception, a young woman approached her, a reporter for the county newspaper. "Miss Paulson, I'm writing a feature about community heroes. Would you be willing to talk about what makes Marshfield special?" Edith smiled. "I'm not sure I'm the hero type." "Oh, but you are! The mayor told me you've been instrumental in so many town improvements. And people say you have an incredible memory, that you know everything about this town." "I just pay attention," Edith said gently. "And I care about details. That's not heroic. It's just doing the job well." "But that's exactly what makes someone a hero, isn't it?" the reporter persisted. "Showing up every day, caring about the details, serving your community with dedication. True heroism is often quiet. It's the teacher who inspires students, the nurse who comforts patients, the clerk who maintains the systems that keep society functioning. It's being ready when you're needed. Edith considered this. I suppose you might be right. True heroism is often unremarkable from the outside. It's doing what needs to be done when it needs to be done, regardless of recognition. That's beautiful, the reporter said, scribbling notes. Can I quote you on that? Of course. As summer arrived and Edith approached her 66th birthday, she found herself reflecting on the extraordinary year that had passed. She had faced her greatest fear, that her judgment couldn't be trusted, that she would make another catastrophic mistake. And she had discovered that while she could still be wrong about small things, her fundamental analytical capabilities remained sound. More importantly, she had learned that hiding from her capabilities wasn't protecting people. Using them appropriately, with proper oversight and collaboration, that was protection. One Sunday afternoon in July, Edith was reading on her porch when Sheriff Daniels's patrol car pulled up. He got out, but instead of his usual uniform, he was in civilian clothes. Afternoon, Edith. Got time for a walk? They strolled through the neighborhood together, waving at neighbors tending gardens and children riding bikes. I wanted to tell you something, the sheriff said. I'm retiring next year. 25 years is enough. Time to let someone younger take over. You'll be missed. You've been a good sheriff. I hope so. But here's the thing. I've been talking to the FBI about ongoing community liaison programs. Ways to keep local law enforcement connected with federal resources, especially regarding potential security threats. He paused at a park bench and they sat down. They asked me to recommend someone from Marshfield who could serve as an informal consultant, someone with good judgment, attention to detail, and the ability to recognize patterns that might indicate problems. Someone the community trusts. Edith smiled, understanding where this was going. And you recommended me. I did. Nothing formal, nothing that would require you to leave your job or reveal your background. Just, if you notice things, you'd have a direct line to report them. And occasionally, they might ask for your perspective on intelligence matters that could affect small towns. A bridge between worlds, Edith said thoughtfully. Exactly. You've already proven you can do it. And I think you've proven to yourself that you can do it well. What do you say? Edith thought about it. A year ago, she would have refused immediately, unable to imagine returning to anything resembling intelligence work. But she was different now. She had tested herself and not been found wanting. She had integrated her past and present into something coherent. I'd be honored, she said, on one condition. I remain who I am here. Edith Paulson, archive clerk, volunteer librarian, baker of apple pies. That's not a cover anymore. That's who I actually am. Wouldn't have it any other way, the sheriff replied. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the summer afternoon unfold around them. You know what's funny? Edith said finally. I came to Marshfield to escape my past. To be someone small and insignificant who could never again make decisions that might hurt people. But what I've learned is that there's no such thing as insignificant. Every person matters. Every role is important. The archive clerk can save lives just as surely as the intelligence analyst, maybe more so because she's trusted, embedded, present in ways that analysts from outside never could be. That's profound, the sheriff said. It's true. My mistake was thinking that the solution to making a terrible error was to never be in a position to make important decisions again. But the real solution was to learn from the error, to understand what went wrong, and to use that knowledge to make better decisions in the future. Sounds like you've found peace with it. I'm getting there. Some days are harder than others. I still dream about the 18 people sometimes. But I also remember the hundreds I helped save. Both are part of who I am now. By the fall, 1 year after the arrests, Edith had settled into her expanded role. She continued her work at the town hall, maintained her volunteer commitments, and participated in community life. But she also served as an informal consultant on security matters, both for Marshfield and, occasionally, for federal authorities seeking small-town perspectives on intelligence issues. She had become a bridge between the intelligence community and local law enforcement, between federal resources and community needs, between her past and present. It felt right, in a way nothing had felt right for 18 years. One crisp October morning, Edith was processing documents in the archive when Tom came down with a new batch of business registrations. "Another wave of new businesses," he said cheerfully. "Must be Marshfield's lucky year." Edith reviewed the applications with her usual thoroughness. They all appeared legitimate. A new restaurant, a bookstore, a small manufacturing company relocating from a larger city. But she checked anyway, cross-referenced the registered agents, verified the addresses, looked for patterns. Everything was clean. These were genuine businesses, not fronts. She smiled to herself. The difference between paranoia and vigilance was knowing when to stop looking for problems that didn't exist. "These look fine," she told Tom. "Welcome additions to the community." That afternoon, Margaret stopped by with coffee and gossip. "Have you heard about the new restaurant opening? French cuisine. In Marshfield. Never thought I'd see the day." They chatted about town news, about Margaret's daughter's upcoming visit, about the upcoming harvest festival. Normal friendship. Normal conversation. But now without the weight of secrets between them. Edith had shared enough of her past that Margaret understood her better, and that understanding had only deepened their friendship. As November arrived, bringing the first anniversary of the investigation and arrests, the town organized a memorial event. Not to celebrate the arrests, that felt wrong, but to express gratitude for safety, for community, for the ordinary blessings of life. Edith attended, standing in the crowd as various speakers reflected on the past year. "We learned that evil can come to any place," Reverend Thompson said from the podium. "But we also learned that good people, paying attention, can prevent that evil from succeeding. We learned that community isn't just about being friendly neighbors. It's about watching out for each other, noticing when something's wrong, and having the courage to speak up." After the event, Edith walked home slowly, taking in the autumn colors, the familiar streets, the sense of belonging she had finally allowed herself to feel. At her cottage, she found a package waiting on her doorstep. It had been delivered by courier, no return address, but she recognized the seal, Federal Government. Inside was a letter from Richard Deng. "Dear Edith, as the first anniversary of the Marshfield investigation approaches, I wanted to write to you personally to express gratitude that goes beyond official commendations. You came to us with suspicions based on pattern recognition and analytical instinct. You provided comprehensive intelligence that allowed us to identify and neutralize a significant threat. Your work quite literally saved hundreds of lives. But more than that, you proved something important, that it's possible to move forward from tragedy, to learn from mistakes without being destroyed by them, and to continue serving in new ways when old paths are closed. Your journey, from the incident 18 years ago, through your time in Marshfield, to your role in this investigation demonstrates the kind of resilience and growth that makes you an example to others in the intelligence community who struggle with the weight of their decisions. I know you've chosen to remain in Marshfield, and I respect that choice. But I want you to know that your final contribution to the field has not gone unnoticed or unappreciated. The intelligence community is better for having had you. Marshfield is better for having you now. And the hundreds of people who lived because of your intervention, most of whom will never know your name, are better for your existence. Thank you for your service, then and now. With respect and admiration, Richard. Edith read the letter twice, then carefully filed it away in her personal papers. Not to hide it, but to preserve it as a marker of how far she had come. That evening, she made herself tea and sat on her porch, watching the sunset over Marshfield. The maples on her street blazed red and gold. Children played in the gathering dusk. The ordinary miracle of peaceful life unfolded around her. She thought about paths not taken, about who she might have been if the incident hadn't happened. Would she have risen to leadership in the intelligence community? Would she have prevented other attacks through years of continued service? Perhaps. But she also wouldn't have known Marshfield, wouldn't have had Margaret's friendship, or Tom's trust, or the satisfaction of her archive work. Wouldn't have learned that heroism could be quiet, that service could be local, that protecting people didn't always require classified clearances and global scope. She had lost something when she resigned, a career, an identity, a version of herself that might have accomplished great things. But she had gained something too, a home, a community, a fuller understanding of what it meant to be human with all its flaws and capabilities. The sunset faded to purple, then to darkness. Stars emerged overhead. Edith finished her tea and went inside, content. 2 years later, Edith stood at the town hall podium once more, but this time for a very different reason. After 20 years of service, she was finally retiring from her position as archive clerk. The small ceremony was attended by what felt like half of Marshfield, town employees, friends, neighbors, people whose documents she had found over the years. Edith Paulson came to Marshfield 20 years ago, the mayor said in his speech, and in that time, she has been far more than an archive clerk. She has been a keeper of our history, a guardian of our records, and yes, as we learned 2 years ago, a protector of our community in ways most of us will never fully understand. Applause filled the room. In her retirement, Edith will continue to serve Marshfield as a consultant on our Public Safety Committee and as a volunteer at our library. Because once you're part of Marshfield, you're always part of Marshfield. More applause, louder this time. When Edith spoke, she kept it brief. 20 years ago, I came to Marshfield looking for a quiet place to disappear. What I found instead was a place to belong. You welcomed a stranger, trusted her with your history, and gave her the chance to become part of something meaningful. For that, I will be forever grateful. After the ceremony, people lined up to shake her hand, to thank her, to share memories. Sheriff Daniels, retired himself now, gave her a bear hug. You done good, Edith. Real good. Margaret was crying openly. What am I going to do without our weekly dinners? We'll still have them, Edith assured her. I'm retiring from the archive, not from life. Later that evening, alone in her cottage, Edith looked around at the home she had created. Pictures on the walls, town events, friends, moments of happiness accumulated over 20 years. Books on the shelves, her grandmother's pie recipe framed in the kitchen. A life. A real life, fully lived. Her phone rang, her regular phone now, not a burner. It was Richard. "Saw the news about your retirement," he said. "Congratulations. Any plans for what's next?" "Actually, yes. I'm writing a book." "Really? About what?" "Small town life. Community. How ordinary people doing ordinary things create extraordinary safety and stability. How paying attention matters. How everyone has a role in protecting what they value." "That sounds wonderful. Will it include your story?" "In a way. Changed names, different setting, but yes, the core truth will be there. That you can come back from mistakes. That service takes many forms. That heroism is often quiet and local, rather than dramatic and global. I'd like to read it when it's done. You'll be the first person I send it to." After hanging up, Edith opened her laptop and looked at the document she had been working on for months. A story about a woman named Diana, who worked in a quiet town and noticed things others missed. A story about redemption and purpose and belonging. A story that was, in all the ways that mattered, true. She began to write. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the town hall, casting long rectangles of golden light across the polished wooden floors. As her fingers moved across the keyboard, Edith smiled. She was 67 years old, retired from one career and beginning another. She had survived tragedy, built a new life, saved hundreds of people, and finally, made peace with all the versions of herself. The quiet keeper of Marshfield was writing her own story now. And it was a good story, not perfect, not without pain or regret, but real and meaningful, and ultimately hopeful. Just like the life she had lived and the community she had helped protect. Just like all the small acts of courage and attention that added together made the world a bit safer and kinder. Just like Marshfield itself, an ordinary place where extraordinary things could happen when people cared enough to notice and were brave enough to act. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We'd love to hear what inspired you the most. And where in the world are you watching from? Let us know below. Normal friendship, normal conversation, but now without the weight of secrets between them. Edith had shared enough of her past that Margaret understood her better, and that understanding had only deepened their friendship.